It was a quiet evening when the world first began to whisper about something that seemed too good to be true. People on social media, film blogs, and small fan forums all started to ask the same question in hushed tones. Could there really be a new dream film with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock? For years, fans had hoped to see them together again. They remembered the bond they shared on screen, the warmth in their eyes, and the way their silence sometimes spoke louder than words. Many believed that their connection was not just acting but a reflection of something deeper, two souls who understood each other in a way that few could. The idea of a new project felt like the return of a memory that had never truly left. But behind those whispers was a story no one yet knew. A story not only about film, but about dreams, resilience, and the hidden struggles of two people who had touched millions, yet carried their own scars in silence. Keanu was sitting alone in his modest home when the first call came. The producer spoke with excitement, but Keanu's mind was elsewhere. He had been through storms in life, loss, loneliness, and quiet nights that stretched too long. He had learned to live with humility, to walk without demanding the spotlight, to give kindness without expecting it back. Still, something in his heart stirred when he heard Sandra's name. He remembered her laugh, the way she would always encourage him on set, the softness in her tone when he doubted himself. But he also remembered the last time they had spoken, when she had been going through her own struggles. Sandra had always shown the world a strong, confident smile, yet behind it she carried pain few ever saw. That night, Keanu sat by the window looking at the city lights, asking himself if he had the strength to step into another journey that might reopen old emotions. Far away, Sandra was in her garden, holding a letter she had written to herself years ago. It was a note she kept during her darkest days, reminding her to stay strong for her family and for the people who believed in her. She had learned to hide her tears behind courage, to face the world with grace even when her heart was heavy. When she heard about the idea of working with Keanu again, her hands trembled. It was not just about acting. It was about facing memories that never faded. The world only saw two stars, but the truth was deeper. Both had walked through fire, both had lost pieces of themselves, and both had rebuilt their lives on respect, humility, and kindness. The possibility of joining hands again on screen was more than a career choice. It was a test of resilience and trust. As the first news article spread online, fans reacted with joy. They posted comments filled with hope, like old friends waiting for a reunion. But beneath that excitement, Keanu and Sandra stood at the edge of an emotional cliff, unsure if they could take the leap. The story was only beginning, and already it was pulling them into a space where past wounds and present hopes collided. Every decision they made from this point would not only shape a film, but also reveal the strength of two human hearts. And so, with one phone call unanswered and one message left unsent, the journey of a new dream began in silence. The night after the whispers began to spread, Keanu found himself restless. He walked through his quiet home, the sound of his footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floor. In his hand, he held an old photograph, one taken during the filming of their first movie together. Sandra was laughing in the picture, her eyes filled with a light that seemed endless. Beside her, Keanu's expression was calm, almost shy, but there was something unspoken in the way he looked at her. It was the kind of look that revealed comfort, trust, and a connection that no script could create. He placed the photo back on the shelf and sat down. In his heart, he knew that working with her again might bring healing, not just for the audience, but for both of them. Yet fear still lingered. He had learned that happiness sometimes came with a price, and he wondered if they were ready to pay it. Meanwhile, Sandra sat alone in her living room. The lights were dim, the air heavy with silence. She picked up her phone many times that evening, her fingers hovering over Keanu's name in her contacts. She wanted to call, to hear his voice, to ask if he was ready for this journey. But each time she stopped. She whispered to herself, what if he says no? What if this dream stays just a dream? In her heart, she carried memories of their friendship, of quiet talks between scenes, of the way he never treated her like a star, but simply like a person. It was that respect, that humility, that had stayed with her all these years. Now, the chance to stand beside him again on screen felt like a gift, but also a challenge. She knew the world would expect magic, and that pressure was heavy. Days passed, and the silence between them grew louder. Fans online grew more excited, making posters, sharing old clips, and writing messages like, "We need this film," and they were meant to return together. The noise of the world grew brighter, but in the quiet spaces of their lives, Keanu and Sandra were still locked in their private thoughts. Then, one evening, Sandra received a message from an old friend in the industry. The words were simple: "If not now, then when?" Those words stayed in her mind all night. She thought about resilience, about the times in her life when she almost gave up, and how kindness had always guided her forward. She thought about Keanu, how he had faced storms with dignity, how he had chosen humility over fame, and how his quiet strength had once given her hope. The next morning, as the sun rose and painted her home in soft golden light, she finally made her decision. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady as she dialed his number. The phone rang once, twice, and then she heard his voice. "Hello," he said softly. There was a long pause. She almost lost her courage, but then she whispered, "It's me. It's Sandra. I heard about the project, and I think maybe we should talk." Keanu's silence on the other end was not cold. It was thoughtful. She could almost hear the weight of his heart in that pause. Then finally he said, "I was waiting for you to call." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Their conversation that morning was not about contracts, directors, or scripts. It was about trust, about whether they were ready to walk this road together again. They spoke of the past, of the laughter and the pain, of the lessons life had carved into them. And slowly, as the minutes passed, they began to realize that this film was not just a chance to perform, it was a chance to heal. When the call ended, both of them felt something they had not felt in years. It was not excitement, not pressure, but a quiet strength that whispered, "You are not alone." And somewhere, in the quiet corners of their souls, a new dream had taken its first real breath. The days after their call carried a new energy. Keanu walked through the city streets with a calmness that people around him noticed, though they did not know why. He wore his usual modest clothes, blending into the crowd, but inside he carried a secret spark. The thought of working with Sandra again, of facing the world side by side, was both frightening and comforting. He reminded himself that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Sandra, too, found herself smiling more often. When she looked in the mirror, she saw not just an actress who had lived through trials, but a woman ready to embrace a new chapter. She began rereading old journals where she had written about strength and kindness. The words reminded her of the person she always tried to be, not perfect, but resilient, and willing to share her heart with others. Their managers soon arranged a private meeting at a small, quiet cafe far from Hollywood's noise. When Sandra arrived, she saw Keanu sitting by the window, sipping tea, his posture calm, but his eyes distant. For a moment, she simply watched him, remembering how time had carved lines on both their faces, lines that spoke of struggle, but also of survival. When he looked up and saw her, his expression softened, and he stood to greet her with a quiet smile. "It's been a long time," she said, her voice gentle. "Too long," he replied. They sat together, and for the first time in years, the silence between them was not heavy. It was warm, almost like a familiar blanket. They began to talk, slowly at first, then more freely. They spoke about life outside the screen, about moments of loneliness, about the battles no one ever saw. They shared memories of laughter from old film sets, of nights when exhaustion nearly broke them, but friendship carried them through. As the conversation deepened, Sandra's eyes glistened with emotion. "People see us as characters," she whispered, "but they forget we are human. They think we live perfect lives, but we carry pain too." Keanu nodded. "Yes, maybe that's why this film matters. Not just for the audience, but for us. Maybe it's a chance to show truth, not just performance." Their words were not just about cinema. They were about life itself, the power of resilience, the quiet dignity of standing again after being broken, and the importance of kindness, even in a world that often forgot it. Yet, As the hope between them grew, so did the shadows. Neither of them knew that behind the project lay challenges they had not imagined. Producers argued about scripts. Studios demanded guarantees, and whispers of doubt spread in private rooms. Some people believed they were too old for this kind of dream, too fragile for the pressure of expectation. One evening, Sandra received a call from a producer who spoke coldly. "Audiences may love the idea, but love is not enough. We need strength, we need certainty. Are you sure you can carry this?" The words pierced her heart. After she hung up, she sat in the dark, feeling the weight of those doubts pressing on her. But then she remembered the look in Keanu's eyes at the cafe, the quiet assurance that he believed in her. That memory lit a flame inside her. The next morning, she called him. "Keanu," she said softly, "they doubt us, but I don't. Not if you're beside me." He was silent for a moment, then answered with a steady voice. "Then let's show them who we are. Not with pride, not with noise, but with truth." It was then that their bond deepened. This was no longer just about a film. It was about standing together, about proving that kindness, humility, and resilience could outshine doubt. As the sun set that evening, both of them in their separate homes felt the same quiet strength. No matter what came next, they knew they were no longer walking alone. The weeks that followed were filled with restless energy. News of the possible film spread further, reaching not only fans but also the industry's sharp critics. Some wrote glowing words calling it a dream reunion, while others questioned if Keanu and Sandra could truly carry such weight again. Both of them read these comments in silence, feeling the pressure of expectation pressing against their hearts. Keanu dealt with it in his own quiet way. He began long walks in the early mornings before the city woke. As the sky slowly changed from darkness to light, he thought about what it meant to stand in front of the camera again with Sandra. He knew the world saw him as strong, but he also knew how fragile a soul could be when it carried too many memories. Yet every step reminded him of resilience, of how he had always found strength in silence, in humility, and in choosing kindness when the world chose noise. Sandra, on the other hand, turned to her journals again. She filled the pages with thoughts, fears, and hopes. One night she wrote, "This is not about proving myself to them. This is about proving to myself that I can still rise." She placed her hand on the page, as if sealing a promise to her own heart. Finally, the day came when both were invited to a private reading of the first draft of the script. They arrived at a small studio far away from flashing lights. Inside the dimly lit room, a table held 2 copies of the script. Keanu arrived first, dressed simply, his face calm. Moments later, Sandra entered, her smile soft but her eyes filled with nerves. When their eyes met, there was no need for words. They both understood that this moment carried more weight than the world outside could ever know. As they began reading, the room grew quiet. The story on those pages was not just fiction. It was a reflection of life. 2 souls meeting again after years apart, both carrying scars, both searching for meaning. The words felt familiar, almost as if written for them. With every line they spoke aloud, their voices trembled not with weakness, but with truth. At one point, Sandra looked up from the script, her eyes moist. This feels too close," she whispered. Keanu nodded slowly. "Maybe that's why it matters. Because it's real." Their reading lasted hours, but neither of them noticed time passing. When it ended, the director watching from the corner spoke quietly, almost in awe. "I don't think this is just a film anymore. I think this is something the world needs to see." But outside that room, challenges were already rising. Powerful voices in the industry argued over budgets and risks. Some said the project was too emotional, too quiet for modern audiences. They demanded changes that would strip away the heart of the story. One evening, Sandra received another sharp call. The producer's voice was impatient. "We need more action, more spectacle. People don't want silence, they want noise. Tell Keanu this isn't a charity project." Her hands trembled as she ended the call. For a moment, doubt threatened her again. But then she remembered Keanu's steady words. "Let's show them who we are." She breathed deeply and made a choice. She would not let anyone silence the truth of this story. The next morning, she met Keanu in a quiet park. Autumn leaves surrounded them, falling gently, painting the ground in shades of gold and red. She told him everything about the call, her voice heavy with frustration. Keanu listened, his expression calm, his eyes thoughtful. When she finished, he spoke softly. "We can't control the noise, but we can control the truth we give. If we stay honest, people will feel it. No budget. No critic can erase that." Those words settled into her heart like a seed of strength. Together they walked through the park, silent but united. And in that silence, they understood something important. This was not just about a dream film. It was about showing the world that resilience, humility, and kindness could survive even in an industry built on noise. As the wind carried leaves around them, both felt a quiet promise. They were not just actors, not just stars. They were humans standing side by side, ready to fight for something real. The following weeks became a test of patience and strength. Every step forward seemed to meet resistance. Behind closed doors, executives pushed for changes that would twist the heart of the story. They wanted louder scenes, brighter lights, and faster dialogue. But what Keanu and Sandra knew deep inside was that the real power of this project lived in its silence. In the pauses where hearts spoke louder than words, Keanu carried himself with quiet dignity through the arguments. He rarely raised his voice, but when he spoke, people listened. In one meeting, after hearing endless talk of profits and spectacle, he finally leaned forward and said softly, "You can make many films with noise, but sometimes the world needs stillness. This is that time." The room fell into silence, not because they agreed, but because they felt the weight of his truth. Sandra, too, found her strength. She had always been graceful under pressure, but now she allowed her honesty to shine. When a producer questioned her ability to carry emotional weight, she looked directly at him and said, "People do not watch us because we are perfect. They watch because we are human. That is what we must give them." Her words carried the strength of every struggle she had survived, and for a moment even her critics had no reply. Still, the doubts did not disappear. Articles appeared in the press questioning the project's future. Some writers claimed the dream film was already collapsing. Others suggested it was just a fantasy created by fans. Keanu and Sandra read those headlines quietly, each in their own home, feeling the sting but refusing to let it stop them. To ease the pressure, they began to meet more often, away from the cameras. Sometimes in quiet cafes, sometimes in empty rehearsal rooms, sometimes just walking through quiet streets at night. These moments became their refuge. They talked about life, about loss, about kindness, about the scars the world never saw. Each meeting drew them closer, not just as colleagues, but as two souls who understood the weight of silence and the beauty of resilience. One evening, during a rehearsal in a small studio, something unexpected happened. They were practicing a scene where their characters faced each other after years apart. The script asked for a short exchange of words, but when Sandra looked into Keanu's eyes, the room shifted. For a long moment, neither spoke. Her lips trembled, his eyes softened, and the silence between them became filled with every memory, every unspoken truth, every fragile emotion they had carried for years. The director, watching from the corner, whispered, "Don't stop. This is it." But they were not acting anymore. They were living the truth of two lives that had seen pain, kindness, loss, and survival. When the moment finally ended, Sandra's eyes held tears, and Keanu's expression carried the quiet strength that had always defined him. The director stood in awe. "This," he said, his voice trembling, "this is what the world will remember. Not explosions, not noise. This." That night, when they left the studio, the air between them felt lighter. They walked side by side under the soft glow of streetlights, not speaking but knowing they had found something deeper than a script. Yet just as hope grew, another obstacle appeared. News arrived that the studio was considering replacing the director with someone more commercial. This decision threatened to break everything they had built. When Sandra heard it, her heart sank. She called Keanu immediately, her voice filled with worry. "If they change him, the soul of this story will die," she whispered. Keanu's voice was calm but firm. Then we will not let it happen. The days ahead would not be easy. They would need courage, unity, and unshakable trust. But as they stood at the edge of another storm, they knew one truth. When they walked together, nothing could silence their hearts. The news of the director possibly being replaced hit harder than either of them expected. The director was not just a professional guiding the project. He was the one who understood their silence, who saw the meaning in every pause, and who valued the heart of the story more than spectacle. Without him, the film risked becoming something hollow, something that no longer carried truth. Keanu sat in his home that night, staring at the script laid open on the table. The words on the pages still held power, but he knew they could easily be stripped of life if placed in the wrong hands. He thought about all the battles he had fought silently in his life, about how resilience was not just surviving pain, but protecting what mattered most. In his heart, he decided this was one of those battles. Sandra, too, felt the weight of the moment. She had lived through enough storms to know when a fight was worth it. Standing in her kitchen with the phone in her hand, she whispered to herself, "If we give up now, everything we built will vanish." She thought of the rehearsals, the silence they had shared, the fragile truth they had uncovered in each other's eyes. That was not something to surrender. The next morning, they met with the director in a quiet park, away from cameras and noise. The man looked tired, his eyes heavy with worry. "They think I'm not strong enough for this," he admitted softly. "They want someone louder, someone who will make it bigger." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Strength is not loud. Strength is steady. You are the heart of this story. Without you, it will lose its soul." Sandra nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "We will stand with you. If they replace you, then they will have to replace us too." The director's eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. In that moment, he understood that he was not fighting alone. Together, they faced the studio. In a long meeting filled with tension, executives argued about risk and profit. But Keanu and Sandra stood side by side, their presence quiet yet unshakable. When asked why they refused the changes, Sandra spoke first. "Because stories are not only about money. Stories are about truth. People do not remember explosions, they remember hearts. And this story is about hearts." Then Keanu added, his voice calm but firm, "If you want noise, you can hire anyone. If you want truth, let us finish what we started." The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. The executives exchanged looks, calculating risks. Finally, one of them sighed. "Very well. But if this fails, the blame is yours." Keanu simply nodded. "We will carry it." Walking out of the building that day, the three of them felt the weight lift. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they had kept the soul of their story alive. As they left, Sandra turned to Keanu and whispered, "I don't know what the world will say when this film is finished, but I know one thing. Whatever happens, we chose truth." Keanu looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet strength. "And that is enough." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with soft colors, both of them felt something they had not felt in years. It was not victory, not relief, but a calm fire inside their hearts. The fire of resilience, the fire of trust, the fire of knowing they were walking a road that mattered. But in the shadows of that hope, another challenge was waiting. Outside forces, hidden agendas, and the weight of expectations still loomed over them. They did not know what storms would come next. But for now, they carried a truth that no one could take away. The storm came faster than they expected. As the project moved forward, outside, voices grew louder. Some critics mocked the film before a single scene was finished, calling it too quiet and too heavy for modern audiences. Others said Keanu and Sandra were chasing a dream that belonged to the past. The pressure was sharp, and many around them began to doubt. But inside the small studio where they rehearsed, the truth was alive. Each day, Keanu and Sandra poured themselves into their roles. Their scenes were not built on spectacle, but on silence, on pauses filled with unspoken pain and unshakable hope. The director captured every moment with care, refusing to let anyone strip away the heart of the story. One evening, during a late rehearsal, Sandra broke down after a particularly emotional scene. Her tears flowed freely as she whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to give them what they want." She buried her face in her hands, feeling the weight of expectation pressing against her chest. Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. "They don't want noise. They don't want perfection. They want honesty, and you have always carried that. It's who you are." She looked up at him through her tears, and in that moment, she saw not just a colleague, but a friend who had walked beside her through shadows and light. His quiet words gave her the strength to rise again. The filming continued, each day pulling them deeper into a story that mirrored their own lives. Scenes of loss, of resilience, of kindness, and of finding strength in silence came alive through them. Sometimes even the crew watching behind the cameras wiped their eyes, realizing they were witnessing something more than a film. After months of struggle, the film was finally complete. The premiere was small, nothing like the grand events filled with flashing lights and noise, but the atmosphere carried something far more powerful: truth. As the film played on the screen, the audience sat in silence, their eyes fixed, their hearts open. When the final scene ended, there was no immediate applause. Instead, there was a pause, a deep silence where everyone seemed to breathe together. And then slowly, the applause began. Soft at first, then rising, echoing through the room like a wave. Keanu and Sandra sat side by side, their hands folded in their laps, their faces calm, but their eyes moist with emotion. They did not need words. They knew what they had given was real. After the premiere, a young woman approached Sandra, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "This film gave me hope. It reminded me that even broken hearts can heal." Another man came to Keanu and said, "I thought silence was weakness. Tonight I learned it can be strength." These were the moments that mattered. Not headlines, not profits, but hearts touched, lives changed. Souls reminded that kindness and resilience still had a place in the world. As they walked out of the theater into the cool night air, Sandra turned to Keanu with a soft smile. "We did it," she whispered. He nodded, his expression calm, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "We didn't just make a film. We kept a dream alive." They stood there for a moment, side by side, not as stars, not as symbols, but as two humans who had chosen truth over noise, resilience over fear, and kindness over pride. And though the world outside would continue to make noise, in their hearts they knew that silence had spoken louder.